Russia is increasing its demands on NATO. Today, the defense minister is saying that U.S. mercenaries are plotting a provocation in the Donbass, which some would say could be a pretext for some sort of invasion. The question is, since the president talked to President Putin, it seems as though the buildup is continuing, the threats are continuing from Vladimir Putin. So, at this point, how do you counter the Russian aggression? Are you concerned about something that would be less than a military invasion, that in some sort of a gray area where it might be more difficult? What would the U.S. response to that be in the Donbass, for instance? And there were reports that the U.S. and the U.K. are on high alert for a potential Russian cyber attack on critical infrastructure in Ukraine, which has happened in previous years during the holiday season, to either weaken the Zelensky government as a press predicate before an invasion, or as an alternative to a military, a kinetic attack, which would be harder to retaliate against. So the bottom line is, how is diplomacy going to deal with this increasing Russian threat, which doesn't seem to be minimized at all by the talks, by the presidential talks, and
Andrea,
the threats?
We're engaged in diplomacy and deterrence at the same time. These two things go hand in hand. As you know, just to step back for a second, President Biden, when he first met with President Putin in Geneva some months ago, and you were there, said to President Putin that our strong preference is for a more predictable and stable relationship between Russia and the United States. But if Russia continues to engage in reckless or aggressive actions, we will respond, and we'll respond strongly. Since then, we've seen this build up again around Ukraine. That is of deep concern, not just to us, but to allies and partners in Europe and beyond. And we've seen plans that Russia has to commit renewed acts of aggression against Ukraine that it could implement on very short order. And so we've done two things. We have worked in very close coordination with allies and partners, not only to show the shared concern, but to put in place what would be a very meaningful and massive response if Russia commits renewed acts of aggressions. We've seen, and I think you've seen, statements coming out of NATO, the European Union, the G7, all making clear that there would be massive consequences. That's the language used, massive consequences for Russia if it engages in further acts of aggression against Ukraine. At the same time, President Biden's made clear that there's a much better path, and that is diplomacy. And we're committed to engaging in that if Russia is too. And to that end, President spoke to President Putin, as you know, a couple of weeks ago by video conference. There were follow-on conversations, notably between the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his Russian counterpart. And as the White House noted yesterday, we have said, and Russia has also said, that we're prepared to engage diplomatically through multiple channels. The existing strategic stability dialogue that we have with Russia, between Russia and the United States, through the NATO-Russia Council on issues of particular concern to NATO, and through the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, that has as its members, among others, all of our European allies and partners, Ukraine, the United States, and Russia. And I think you'll see relatively early in the new year engagements in all of those areas to see if we can advance the differences diplomatically. Russia has said, and it put out some papers on this, that it has grievances, demands, concerns. Well, so does the United States and all of our European partners about Russia's conduct, the actions it's taken. All of that will be on the table. And if we can make our way forward diplomatically, that is far preferable. Last thing I'll say on this is that in all of this, we are in absolute solidarity, coordination, consultation with allies and partners. We are doing nothing about them, without them. All of this is being done together. And we'll see which direction President Putin wants to take.
His demands, though, to not deploy troops in any of the NATO countries?
There are some very obvious non-starters in things that the Russians have put on the table. There may be other issues that are appropriate for discussion and conversation, just as there are things that we would put on the table that Russia needs to respond to. But look, the president's been extremely clear for many, many years about some basic principles that no one is moving back on. The principle that one country does not have the right to change by force the borders of another. That one country does not have the right to dictate the policies of another, or to tell that country with whom it may associate. One country does not have the right to exert a sphere of influence. That notion should be relegated to the dustbin of history. And those principles are inviolate. They're very clear. The president's held them for a long time. That's not going to change.
Just to go off of that, you've just reiterated that the United States is prepared to engage diplomatically with Russia in multiple different venues, different channels. We've been hearing that over the last few days. I wonder if a meeting between President Biden and President Putin is one of those options that the Biden administration would consider, and if there would be any preconditions that Russia would have to take before another meeting between President Biden and President Putin.
Well, of course, the presidents have met twice, once face-to-face in person in Geneva, and then just a couple of weeks ago by video conference. And the next steps on the diplomatic track, as I said, are through the strategic stability dialogue that we've already established, that is between Russia and the United States, the NATO-Russia Council, and the OSCE. And let's see if and where any of these conversations go, whether we can actually make progress diplomatically. At the same time, when it comes to Ukraine itself, we've long said that the best way to resolve the conflict in eastern Ukraine and to restore to Ukraine the border that it's entitled to is through the so-called Minsk process, the agreements that Russia and Ukraine reached many years ago now to resolve these differences peacefully. And there, we're very much prepared to try to facilitate that, to act in support of what France and Germany are doing with Russia and Ukraine in what's called the Normandy format. So we're working on all of those lines. Whether that leads to, at some point, another meeting between the President and President Putin, I leave that for another day. There are no plans to do that now. I think we have to see if, in the first instance, there's any progress diplomatically. We also want to see Russia de-escalate, to move forces back from the border with Ukraine, to take down the tension. It's much more appropriate to have a conversation in those circumstances than it is when the escalation is happening, not de-escalation.
Well,